April 18th, 1943. The Solomon Islands. The air at 8,000 feet above the Pacific is thick with humidity and the droning roar of Mitsubishi engines. Inside the cramped fuselage of a G-4M Betty bomber, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sits stoically. He is the architect of Pearl Harbor, the supreme commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, and arguably the most important strategic mind in the entire Axis alliance. He is 435 miles from the nearest major American base, deep within what Japanese High Command considers impenetrable airspace. He believes he is safe. He is wrong. In less than 60 seconds, the man who once reportedly promised to dictate peace terms from the White House will be dead, consumed by jungle fire. What is about to happen in the skies over Bougainville is not merely a dogfight. It is a geopolitical assassination executed with industrial precision. It is a mission so improbable, so technically demanding, that when Japanese intelligence later examined the wreckage, they initially refused to believe standard enemy fighters could have conducted it. The geometry didn't make sense. The fuel calculations were impossible by contemporary standards. They were confronted with a terrifying new reality. The Americans had deployed a weapon system capable of shrinking the vast Pacific Ocean, guided by intelligence that saw through their deepest secrets. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must look beyond the cockpit and into the strategic deadlock of early 1943. The brutal campaign for Guadalcanal has just ended in an agonizing Japanese withdrawal. The Imperial Navy is hemorrhaging irreplaceable pilots and ships. Yamamoto is conducting this tour specifically to bolster crumbling morale across forward bases. He is the psychological linchpin of the Japanese war effort. His death would not just be a tactical loss. It would be a catastrophic strategic decoupling for Tokyo's entire Pacific defense plan. The Americans know this, and they have the ultimate tool to exploit it: the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. This aircraft was an anomaly in 1942's fighter design. While European powers were building nimble, short-range interceptors like the Spitfire or the Bf-109, designed to defend airspace over small nations, American strategy required power projection across hemispheres. The P-38 was Lockheed's radical answer. With its twin-boom configuration, tricycle landing gear, and counter-rotating propellers, it looked like an alien artifact compared to the stubby Grumman Wildcats that currently populated Pacific carriers. Japanese pilots supposedly dubbed it Futago no Akuma, the twin-tailed devil. Whether the nickname was widespread during the war is debated by historians, but the fear it inspired was very real. But on this April morning, the Lightning's fearsome silhouette is secondary to its most critical, unglamorous capability:
this massive sweep
extreme
represents
range.
The P-38
This
Lightning,
mission requires flying
formidable
over
reach that
400
changes
miles
the
into
face of the
hostile
Pacific
territory
theater.
at wave-top level, engaging in high-energy combat, and flying home a
While these
round trip
fighters saw
of nearly
significant
1,000
action,
miles
the
without
aircraft we are focusing
refueling.
on today
No
is this
other
one,
Allied fighter in the
legendary
inventory can do it.
P-38 Lightning.
The F-4F Wildcat has a combat radius of barely 175 miles. The powerful new F-4U Corsair can
the arsenal of
theoretically stretch to
democracy churns
400
out the
miles,
Liberator,
but
built
only
by the
under
hands
ideal
of
cruise
dedicated
conditions,
patriots.
not the fuel-guzzling demands of a low-level intercept and subsequent dogfight. The P-38, with its twin Allison V-1710 engines, and massive internal fuel capacity, augmented by drop tanks, is the only option. It is a triumph of American industrial philosophy, solving tactical problems with overwhelming mechanical complexity and raw power. The sequence of events leading to this intercept began 5 days earlier, not on a runway, but in the subterranean intelligence bunker of Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor. American cryptanalysts, having largely broken the Japanese naval code JN-25, intercepted a message so detailed it seemed like a trap. It was Yamamoto's complete itinerary. Departure times down to the minute, arrival at Balalay Airfield, the specific number of escort fighters, and the types of transport aircraft. This intelligence immediately landed on the desk of Admiral Chester Nimitz. The decision to act on this data was agonizingly complex. In 1943, specifically targeting an opposing commander-in-chief for aerial assassination was almost unprecedented. It raised profound ethical questions and risked a severe backlash if it failed. More dangerously, a failed attempt or even a successful one that looked too perfectly timed could alert the Japanese that their codes were broken, blinding Allied intelligence for future operations. Nimitz punted the decision all the way to the White House. President Franklin Roosevelt's response was swift and unequivocal. Get Yamamoto. The strategic value of removing Japan's most capable commander outweighed the intelligence risks. The mission was handed to the Army Air Force's 339th Fighter Squadron at Guadalcanal. They had the plane that could make the flight, but as their commander, Major John Mitchell, looked at the charts, the mission looked less like a military strike and more like a suicide pact. Major John Mitchell, commanding the 339th Fighter Squadron, was a taciturn combat veteran, not a man given to hyperbole. When the order came down, he didn't see glory. He saw a cascade of seemingly impossible technical problems. The target, Balalay Airfield on Bougainville, was 435 miles away. This was not a simple point-and-shoot intercept. It was a journey across an empty quarter of the Pacific, an ocean devoid of landmarks. The route was littered with Japanese-held islands bristling with coastal observers and, more importantly, radar. Any American formation detected flying at altitude would be reported, and the entire Japanese fighter contingent at Rabaul, the largest enemy airbase in the South Pacific, would be scrambled to meet them. Yamamoto's escort would be doubled, and the intercept would fail. The mission demanded an unprecedented combination of stealth, range, and timing. Mitchell's solution was brilliant in its simplicity and absolutely brutal in its demands. He plotted a radical dogleg course. First, the formation would fly west toward the Russell Islands, then pivot northwest, locking onto a precise compass heading of 305 degrees. Critically, they would fly the entire route at wave-top altitude between 10 and 50 feet above the water. This profile was designed to do one thing: stay below the enemy's radar horizon. But it introduced staggering new risks. Flying for over 2 hours just feet from the ocean's surface is physically and mentally exhausting. There is no room for error. A momentary lapse in concentration, a slight downdraft, and the aircraft impacts the water. Furthermore, this low-level flight path made accurate navigation a nightmare. Over open ocean, pilots rely on dead reckoning, calculating position based on a known starting point, a compass heading, and airspeed. But this calculation is constantly corrupted by wind. A crosswind of just 10 miles per hour, unaccounted for, could push the formation dozens of miles off course over a 400-mile leg. Mitchell had no advanced navigation aids. He had a magnetic compass, an airspeed indicator, and a stopwatch. He calculated that to arrive at the intercept point, a tiny 10-mile wide window in the sky, his navigation error could not exceed 1 degree over the entire 2-hour flight. Miss by 2 degrees, and they would miss the intercept entirely, having burned hundreds of gallons of fuel for nothing. The fuel calculations were even more unforgiving. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin 1,475 horsepower Allison V1000 710 engines, was a thirsty machine, especially at low altitude where the air is dense. Each Lightning would take off with 410 gallons of internal fuel, plus 2 165-gallon external drop tanks, for a total of 740 gallons. Mitchell's flight plan was a masterpiece of energy management. He mandated optimal cruise settings, 2,000 revolutions per minute, 32 inches of manifold pressure. At this setting, the P-38 seconds would burn approximately 140 gallons per hour. The outbound leg alone would consume nearly 280 gallons. The plan then required a full power climb from sea level to 10,000 feet to engage the enemy, followed by high-energy combat, both of which would burn fuel at a catastrophic rate, estimated at another 100 gallons in just minutes. The return flight would require another 280 gallons. The total, 660 gallons. This left a reserve of only 80 gallons, less than 30 minutes of flying time to account for navigation errors, unexpected headwinds, or battle damage. There was no margin for error. On the evening of April 17th, Mitchell gathered 18 of his best pilots. The mood was tense. When he revealed the target's identity, the briefing room fell into stunned silence. As Captain Thomas Lanphier later recalled, this wasn't just another intercept. This was a chance to eliminate the man who planned Pearl Harbor. The mission was personal. Mitchell then laid out the cold, hard mechanics of the plan. Strict radio silence was to be maintained from takeoff to engagement. Any pilot whose engine ran rough, whose fuel consumption spiked, or who developed any mechanical issue, was to turn back immediately. The formation would be split. 12 P-38 seconds would serve as the high cover element, climbing to 18,000 feet to intercept and tie up Yamamoto's Zero escorts. 4 specific pilots, Lanphier, Lieutenant Rex Barber, and their wingmen were designated the Killer Flight. Their sole job was to ignore the Zeros and destroy the 2 G-4M bombers. At 7:13 a.m., April 18th, the P-38 seconds, laden to their absolute maximum takeoff weight, clawed their way into the humid morning air from Henderson Field's steel matting runway. They formed up, descended to just above the waves, and turned northwest. Below them, the Pacific stretched out, blue and empty. The clock was running. For 2 agonizing hours, the P-38 formation thundered across the Pacific, their propellers churning the humid air just feet above the waves. This was a unique kind of physical torture. The P-38's twin-boom design, while placing the engines far from the cockpit, did not create a quiet ride. It simply replaced the deafening roar of a single-engine fighter with the stereo, harmonic drone of 2. The cockpit was spacious, which reduced the physical fatigue that plagued pilots on long-range missions in cramped Corsairs. But the mental strain was immense. Each of the 18 pilots was locked in a life-or-death battle with concentration, their eyes scanning the horizon, their instruments and the vast, featureless blue expanse below. A moment's inattention, a slight dip of a wing, and the ocean would claim them. All of this, in strict radio silence, added a dimension of profound psychological isolation. The P-38's design, however, was proving itself. Its liquid-cooled Allison engines were performing flawlessly. Unlike air-cooled radials, which could overheat and foul plugs during extended low-altitude, high-power cruising, the liquid-cooled Allisons maintained a stable, efficient temperature. Their exhaust-driven turbo superchargers, designed for high-altitude performance, were relatively benign at this level, allowing the engines to operate at optimal cruise settings without the parasitic power loss of mechanical superchargers. This efficiency was the core of Mitchell's entire plan. In the lead aircraft, Major Mitchell flew the mission with his eyes, his compass, and his stopwatch. He was in a constant loop of calculation, checking his airspeed, verifying his compass heading against his flight plan, and glancing at his fuel gauges, watching the needles creep steadily lower. At 8:33, exactly 1 hour and 20 minutes into the flight, a dark smudge appeared on the horizon. It was the southern coast of Bougainville, materializing from the haze precisely where Mitchell's calculations said it should be. The navigation era, over 435 miles of open ocean, was less than 2 miles. The squadron had arrived. They were on target, on time, and undetected. Fuel consumption was tracking Mitchell's meticulous predictions almost to the gallon. It was a staggering feat of navigation, a testament to Mitchell's methodical, obsessive planning. The formation now began a slow, fuel-efficient climb, angling toward the predicted intercept point. Then, at 9:34, just 1 minute from the predicted intercept time, the moment arrived. Mitchell's wingman broke radio silence, his voice sharp over the channel. "Bogey, 10 o'clock high." Against the bright morning sky, 2 formations were approaching from the north. Yamamoto. The Japanese admiral was as precise as his reputation, flying exactly on schedule, directly into the jaws of the trap. His transport consisted of 2 Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers, notorious among Allied pilots as the Flying Cigar for their tendency to erupt in flames when hit. They were escorted by 6 of the Imperial Navy's finest. Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighters from the elite 204th Air Group. The Zero had dominated the Pacific for 18 months. It was a legend of maneuverability, and in the hands of a veteran, it was a terrifyingly deadly opponent. But today, they were complacent, flying deep in their own territory, unaware that an American fighter could even exist in this airspace. They maintained a loose, relaxed escort. On Mitchell's command, the entire dynamic of the mission changed in a heartbeat. The 18 P-38 seconds simultaneously released their 165-gallon external tanks. The aircraft, leaping upward, suddenly lightened and freed from their cruise-induced drag. The mission instantly split. Mitchell's 12-plane cover group firewall had their throttles, their turbo superchargers whining as they climbed aggressively to 18,000 feet. Their job to intercept and tangle with the 6 Zeros, keeping them off the killers. The 4-plane killer, Flight Lanfear, Barber, and their wingmen pushed their noses down, accelerating into a high-speed dive directly toward the 2 bombers now just miles away and 8,000 feet below them. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become one of the most confused and hotly debated aerial engagements in American history. Gun camera footage would be incomplete, and pilot reports would contradict each other for decades. But the strategic outcome was brutally, unambiguously clear. The 4 P-38 seconds of the killer flight slammed their throttles forward, the two-stage superchargers kicking in with a howl. They were in a shallow dive, accelerating to over 350 miles per hour, trading altitude for speed to close the final gap. Below them, the two Betty bombers flew in serene formation, their Zero escorts blissfully unaware of the hunters closing from their rear quarter. This was a catastrophic failure of Japanese patrol doctrine, born from the arrogance that this airspace was invulnerable. Lieutenant Rex Barber, in the trailing element of the killer flight, lined up on the second bomber, the one carrying Yamamoto's chief of staff, Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki.
You can really
At
feel the
approximately
difference.
200
P-38,
yards,
dense
a
and
range where the
robust, contrasts
P-38's
sharply with the
concentrated
delicate
nose
engineering
armament
of the
was
Zero
lethally
here on the
effective. Barber squeezed the trigger. The effect was not a burst of gunfire, it was an explosion. 4 50 caliber, heavy machine guns, and one 20mm cannon, all synchronized to fire directly forward, converged on the Betty's right engine. The G-4M, built light for range, had unprotected fuel tanks. It was nicknamed the Haifu Kitake, the tinderbox. Barber's rounds, a mix of armor-piercing and incendiary, shredded the engine and tore into the wing root fuel tank. The bomber erupted in a colossal fireball, its right wing shearing off. It entered a sickening, unrecoverable spin. A plume of black smoke tracing its path down to the jungle. Simultaneously, Captain Thomas Lanphier banked hard, targeting the lead bomber carrying Admiral Yamamoto himself. Lanphier's report would later state he intercepted the bomber as it began an evasive dive toward the jungle canopy. From a high deflection angle, Lanphier raked the fuselage from engine to tail. The bomber's left engine exploded, the wing folded, and the aircraft carrying the architect of Pearl Harbor was violently slammed into the dense jungle below. The entire execution, from the jettison tank's call to the destruction of both primary targets, had taken less than 90 seconds. Above this lethal, low-altitude execution, a second, more chaotic battle was raging. Mitchell's 12-plane cover element, having climbed to 18,000 feet, slammed into the 6 Zero escorts. The Japanese pilots, elite veterans, were momentarily stunned by the impossible appearance of American fighters 400 miles from their base. But their shock quickly turned to professional fury. A swirling dogfight erupted. Here, the dueling design philosophies of the Pacific Air War were laid bare. The P-38 seconds were heavy, fast, and possessed a blistering rate of climb. They were energy fighters. The Zeros were light, agile, and could turn on a dime. The American pilots knew the cardinal rule: never, ever get into a turning fight with a Zero. They used their superior speed and power in boom and zoom attacks, diving on the Zeros, making one high-speed firing pass, and then using their engine power to climb back to altitude, resetting for another attack. The Zeros desperately tried to draw them into a horizontal, turning melee where the Lightning's high wing loading would be its doom. During the chaotic engagement, Lieutenant Besby Holmes managed to confirm 1 Zero kill. The remaining Japanese fighters, seeing their charges destroyed, broke off to protect the surviving, damaged bomber of Admiral Ugaki, which was now trailing smoke and limping away at sea level. On the command channel, Mitchell's voice cut through the combat chatter. His job was over. His navigation was perfect. The intercept was successful. Now, his only job was to get his pilots home. He saw the fuel gauges, saw the time, and made the call. Break off. Break off. Head for home. The entire engagement, from first contact to disengagement, had lasted less than 3 minutes. The elation of the kill was instantly replaced by the cold, stark terror of fuel economics. The 8 seconds reformed and dived back to the wave tops, turning onto the reciprocal heading for Henderson Field. Now, the race was not against the Zeros, but against their own fuel consumption. The return flight was a 435-mile ordeal of pure, high-stakes discipline. Every pilot nursed his throttle, staring at the fuel gauges as the needles dropped toward E. The relief of survival was poisoned by the grim reality that not everyone might make it. Lieutenant Raymond Hines' engines sputtered first. His tanks ran dry over the open ocean. His aircraft slid from the formation, impacting the water and vanishing instantly. He was the only American casualty, a grim sacrifice to the mission's razor-thin margins. The remaining 17 P-38 seconds limped into the landing pattern at Henderson Field. Total mission time, 3 hours and 10 minutes. Distance flown, 870 miles. As they rolled to a stop, ground crews noted the fuel tanks were not just low,
pinpointed their positions,
they were registering
the
empty. When the P-38 seconds landed at Henderson Field, their engines running on fumes, the pilots were debriefed, while still buzzing with adrenaline. They knew they had engaged bombers and escort fighters, and they knew both primary targets were destroyed. But the identity of their quarry remained an unconfirmed, electrifying rumor. The mission's success was not confirmed by gun camera footage, which was chaotic and inconclusive, but by the invisible war being waged by cryptanalysts. Over the following days, American radio intercept stations monitored a frantic and unprecedented surge in Japanese naval communications, all expressing shock and disarray. Then, silence. The official announcement from Tokyo finally came on May 21st, over a month after the attack, a delay that underscored the profound internal crisis the event had caused. Radio Tokyo broadcast to a stunned nation that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had died in combat while directing operations on the front line.
As you can see,
the news shattered Japanese public morale. Yamamoto was not just a commander, he was a national icon, the strategic genius whose reputation had reached mythical status. His death was an unthinkable, personal blow to the Emperor's divine mission. The Japanese reaction behind the scenes was one of disbelief followed by cold dread. Initial reports blamed the loss on a fluke, a tragic, coincidental encounter with a routine American patrol. But as Japanese intelligence teams finally reached the crash site near Buin, this comforting narrative disintegrated. They found Yamamoto's body, thrown clear of the wreckage but still strapped into his seat. The medical examination revealed he had been hit instantly. The wreckage itself told a devastating story of concentrated, overwhelming firepower. The fuselage riddled with 50 caliber punctures and 20 millimeters cannon holes. But the most terrifying discovery was not in the wreckage. It was on their maps. As analysts measured the distance to Henderson Field, 435 miles away, they confronted a calculation that defied their understanding of Allied capabilities. No Allied fighter in operation had ever demonstrated such range. The encounter was not a coincidence. It was a planned assassination. This implied two catastrophic failures. First, that American fighters could now operate at ranges previously considered impossible. And second, far more terrifyingly, that the Americans had broken their highest-level naval codes. The impenetrable Japanese defensive perimeter was a psychological fiction. The Americans could apparently reach anywhere, and they knew exactly where and when to strike. The weapon that made this strategic nightmare a reality was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an aircraft that represented a complete break from conventional 1,930 seconds fighter design. When Lockheed's development team, led by Hall Hibbert and a young, brilliant Clarence Kelly Johnson, began work in 1937, global aviation doctrine was fixated on small, light, and hyper-maneuverable dogfighters for point defense. The P-38 was the antithesis of this philosophy. It was enormous, heavy, complex, and brutally fast. Its twin-boom configuration was not an aesthetic choice, but a revolutionary engineering solution. The Army Air Corps had demanded a high-altitude interceptor with unprecedented speed, climb rate, and most crucially, heavy armament. To meet these demands, without the structural compromise of firing through a propeller arc, Johnson and Hibbert placed the engines in wing-mounted nacelles. This allowed them to pack the entire weapons package into the central fuselage nose. This decision had profound tactical consequences. The P-38 carried a devastating concentrated punch, 4 50 caliber machine guns, and a 20mm cannon. Unlike wing-mounted guns on Spitfires or Wildcats, which had to be converged at a specific, preset distance, the Lightning's guns fired in a parallel stream. This buzzsaw of firepower was effective from point-blank range out to 600 yards or more, far beyond the effective range of its competitors. The twin Allison V-1710 engines provided redundancy.
But the
P-38 pilots in the Pacific routinely returned to base on a single engine, a luxury unheard of for single-engine pilots who faced a ditching or bailout over shark-infested waters. And its revolutionary turbo supercharger system, fed by exhaust gases, gave the Lightning exceptional performance at high altitude, allowing it to maintain full power near 30,000 feet, an altitude where Japanese bombers had previously flown with impunity. But it was the P-38's range, a direct result of its large airframe and efficient, liquid-cooled engines, that made it the irreplaceable weapon of the Pacific theater. The vast distances separating island bases made most targets unreachable for single-engine fighters. Operation Vengeance had just proven, in the most spectacular way possible, that the P-38 had just redrawn the map of the Pacific. No other fighter could have made the journey. The strategic implications of Operation Vengeance rippled across the Pacific, far exceeding the elimination of a single commander. The Japanese Naval High Command was decapitated. Yamamoto's replacement, Admiral Minachi Koga, was a competent administrator but lacked his predecessor's strategic vision and aggressive instinct. From this point forward, Japanese naval operations became increasingly defensive and reactive, a fleet in waiting, responding to American moves rather than initiating their own. But the deeper wound was psychological. If the architect of Pearl Harbor, flying 435 miles inside his own territory, could be targeted and killed with surgical precision, no one was safe. The message was clear. American intelligence was omnipresent, and American reach was limitless. This successful demonstration that American intelligence could penetrate Japanese communications at the highest level, a secret they managed to keep, even after the intercept would prove decisive in the coming battles for the Philippines. Iwo Jima. For the American forces, Operation Vengeance was a profound, almost spiritual, morale boost. The pilots who flew the mission became instant legends. Major John Mitchell, whose navigation was so perfect it bordered on the supernatural, received the Navy Cross, a rare honor for an Army officer, signifying the mission's critical importance to the naval war. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber also received the Navy Cross, though the controversy over which pilot fired the fatal rounds would follow them for the rest of their lives. But the debate over individual credit was irrelevant to the mission's technical achievement. 870 miles flown over featureless ocean, arrival within 1 minute of the planned time, and a successful return on marginal fuel. It was an operational masterpiece. The P-38 Lightning, now proven in the most audacious mission of the war, went on to validate its design philosophy across the Pacific. It was the Lightning that produced the top 2 American aces of all time, Major Richard Bong with 40 victories, and Major Thomas Maguire with 38. Both men flew the P-38 exclusively, using its heavy firepower and high-altitude performance to tear through Japanese formations. Japanese pilots, like Ace Saburo Sakai, learned to fear it. He wrote that attacking the P-38 from ahead was fatal, flying directly into its 8-gun buzzsaw, while its speed and armor made attacks from behind perilous. This contrast in design philosophies reflected the broader strategic realities of the war. Japan, facing limited industrial capacity, built fighters like the Zero, optimized for minimum resources, light, agile, but unarmored and unprotected. America, with its vast industrial might, built fighters like the P-38, heavy, strong, armored, and packed with redundant systems. The P-38, weighing twice as much as a Zero, was a product of a nation that could afford to prioritize pilot survival and overwhelming firepower over pure agility. Ultimately, this industrial advantage would decide the war. By 1944, American factories were producing aircraft faster than Japanese pilots could shoot them down, and American training programs were producing pilots with 400 hours of flight time, while Japanese recruits entered combat with less than 100. The Yamamoto intercept was the moment that foreshadowed this entire outcome. It was the perfect synthesis of American power. Superior technology in the form of the P-38. Superior intelligence from code breakers at Station Hypo. Superior planning by men like John Mitchell. And superior pilot skill to execute the mission without error. It was a message, delivered at 8,000 feet over Bougainville, that American air power was unstoppable, inescapable, and absolutely decisive.